Noam, thank you so much for coming on and for doing this. It's great to have you. I'm excited, and I'm sure everyone watching is excited.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on and excited to, talk shop with you a little bit today.
Perfect. Now I know that you're out, you're trying to promote things, you're trying to touch new audiences, and trying to incorporate and kind of spiderweb out. But for those that don't know you, do you want to just kind of do a brief introduction about your background and how you got started?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a filmmaker and also have a couple of businesses now in this filmmaking space. So I have a production company, and I have all these different content channels where I try to share filmmaking advice from the things that I learn on set through my blog and podcast and newsletter and all that. So, right now my life is very much a mix of writing and directing, mainly indie features. So as we're recording this, I just finished one, and we're gearing up to shoot another in a couple of months here. Sort of a mix of that, running my company, doing some commercial work, and then sharing whatever I can online, and finding ways to hopefully reach more people through podcasts like this. It really all started, I guess, like many filmmakers as a kid. So I won't give everyone the entire story all the way from back then, but it started with just kind of like an interest and curiosity in film. And I was always very DIY, never studied it in school. I just sort of dabbled in things and tried things and failed and learned and hopefully got better in certain areas. And found kind of what I was good at, what I wasn't so good at, and turned that into the things that I now do, which is, like I said, a mix of all these kind of different components of working in film and in and around the industry. So so it very much started back then, very DIY kind of scrappy approach, and that's never changed even as things have sort of evolved and grown a little bit over the years. I still kind of maintain that, that spirit of like, let's just do what we can kind of right now with our resources. And I think there's a lot of value in that philosophy.
One of my favorite things that you say is stop asking for permission
Yeah. Yeah.
and just go and do it. And I know that that's helped me a lot in developing my stuff. But you've directed a number of short films, and at least a couple of features. One of which I own, Psychosynthesis,
Oh,
which was
nice.
really inspiring to me, because the approach that you took. But do you want to talk a little bit maybe about like your creative process and not necessarily where ideas come from, because I hate that question, because if we
Yeah.
knew where ideas came from, we would all be rich. um, but like maybe like how you go into developing things. Like I
Yeah.
know you like self-imposed limitations and things, but
Yes.
is do you have other tools that really help you to develop and get creative?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me comes out of just a need to be creative, because I find that I've recognized over the years if I'm not working on something, I don't feel like balanced. Like I feel like something's off, and there's like some sort of like hole in my life that's missing if I'm not working on a creative project. And I didn't really realize that for a long time. And I think at some point I kind of identified like, oh, whenever I'm working on a film or, writing something or just playing a lot of music, whatever it is, like I tend to feel really good day to day, and I tend to sort of make good choices in every area of my life. And I think, that's sort of a very, top level, like meta view of everything. But I think at this stage in my career, when I look back, it's like so much of the motivation behind working on new projects just comes from a place of like necessity. Like, and I think a lot of people probably, I can't speak for you, but maybe you could relate to this. I think a lot of filmmakers and artists are, like we have a need to kind of express our creativity. And if we don't have an outlet for that, it can be problematic. So for me, a lot of the motivation for films comes from just knowing myself and knowing like, I'm going to make films, for as long as I can. Hopefully the rest of my life, I'm going to make art, in other forms for the rest of my life, no matter what. So there's no point in wasting any time. The time to do it is now, and the time to get the practice is now and, forever. I want to just continually kind of get back up at bat, make more films, try different methods, learn what works and what doesn't. So for me, that motivation is the reason why, pretty much every film I make exists sort of on that meta level. But in terms of like the specific way a project may manifest, that's changed a lot over the years. But I would say that it always starts with like you said before, nobody really knows where the ideas come from, but somehow there's an idea that I've grown attached to that's made its way into my notes app, and then somehow there's at the same time an opportunity to make something, or I look for an opportunity to make something, and then I tend to look for like what is the best idea that I have right now for the circumstance that I'm in to create something, and then how do I make the best version of that? So it's a mixture of like what I want to make because I'm creatively excited about the idea, but also what I can make because it's within my means and within something I could actually do right now. So most of my projects have sort of like come out of that, if that at all answers your question.
Yeah, 100%. So would it be fair to say that like as you kind of look around at your available resources, things that you can just either like get for free or make a connection and kind of be able to utilize something like a van or a location or whatever, right? Are those the things that inspire stories for you?
It can be, yeah. I mean, it like sometimes I'll walk into a location or some like not really a location, but just a place, or I'll be on a trip somewhere and I'll like stay in an Airbnb in like the desert, whatever it is, and just look around and like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like you could shoot a movie here because like it could be in this genre and like the light looks so good here and you could have it about a character that like lives in this town and I've never seen that. But then you'll also start thinking about like, oh, and then we could put people up here if we needed to and it wouldn't cost that much because of where it is and blah blah blah. So yeah, oftentimes it comes out of like just seeing it all together at once when like something is ticking off enough of those boxes. And I think a lot of that just happens almost unconsciously. Like it's the thing everybody talks about where like you get ideas in the shower when you're driving or whatever because that side of your brain is shut off, and that's totally obviously the case and everybody experiences that. But I think the same thing can happen in other moments that people don't talk about as much, like yeah, just being, not even being somewhere different. Like sometimes just seeing something through a different lens. Like at a certain time of year, the light may come in through the window and in my living room in a different way, and it lights something up, and it just sparks an idea. Like it's hard to say kind of where any of this comes from, but I think it comes from being receptive to what's around you as a creative person. And a lot of us are too rigid with like, I only have this one idea I have to make. And then we actually close ourselves off from getting inspired by people we meet or situations that we're in or whatever it is that are going to give us opportunities to actually make something. We don't see those opportunities because we're so kind of narrow minded about like the one path we have to be on or the one project we have to make. So that's been another like kind of overall thing that I found helpful over the years is just trying to get out of my own way and be open to ideas that like, aren't kind of manufactured just by me sitting somewhere and pounding out a story on a keyboard. It has to come from an organic place, I think. And the limitations you mentioned before are a totally separate thing that definitely play into it, and we could talk about that. But yeah, there's all sorts of other stuff that kind of comes underneath that. But I think just being open to creativity and to like the best idea at the moment is a huge part of it for me for sure.
Yeah, this is something that I do. I have always more than one project going at a time. Then, if opportunity presents itself, a location or an actor or anything like that, if the light starts hitting in a certain way during a season, I'm like, this is the idea. It's time, right? It's time to develop that thing. And it sounds kind of that you follow loosely that kind of a mantra as well.
Definitely. Yeah, totally relate.
Awesome. So, Disappearing Boy, obviously, like you've talked about it a lot. It was shot very minimally, one camera, one lens, a great combination of things, the Fujifilm X-T4 and your vintage Leica 50 f2.
Yeah, yeah, good
Okay,
memory
cool.
or research.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I know that it's an unconventional approach to do it with no crew, and I'm sure you've talked about this extensively. I've heard you talk about it extensively on Show Don't Tell. But with that final result and being able to wear all those hats, I have kind of two questions here. One, did you find this limitation more limiting or freeing? And then two, which hat was your favorite during that process? And did you learn anything about which hat you like to wear?
Yeah. So, okay, great question. So, in terms of like, the first part of the question was like, was it more limiting? So here's the thing: is it was so severely limiting the way that I chose to do this. But because of those severe limitations, it actually created a completely different production workflow and style that had it felt like almost no limits on it in other ways. So I felt very happy in almost every way with the way that we sort of like all me and the cast really decided to do this and to orchestrate everything. And from the beginning, I was open minded to having a crew and kind of breaking some of these rules if I needed to, because I didn't want to say that I'm just going to commit to one lens and all this, shoot everything by myself. But like, what if I get 3 days into it and I look at the footage and it's just not working at all? I was open to, okay, some days I'll get a few extra sets of hands on set to help me, but I never actually ended up doing that because I found the benefits of keeping it so limited and so minimal far outweighed any negatives that came with that. But at the same time, you obviously have to design the project with that in mind. So everything about the way that I made this film was different from pretty much any film that I've made, and those films are already pretty unconventionally made. So like this was like a huge departure from kind of how most films would get made. But I'm not the first person to do it by any means. There's lots of other filmmakers doing it successfully and who have had great results. But it's still it even with that, it's pretty unusual. So, we could get into some of the nitty gritty, but as a whole, I would say that yeah, it was very liberating because we knew what we couldn't do from the beginning, and then it just became like, wow, look at all these things now we can do that we couldn't have done if it was a full crew, and we had to do it as kind of a more traditional production.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of Killing Them Softly with Brad Pitt. That movie was shot on one lens, and the shots that they were able to get in that movie were so exciting. And I can't watch it without thinking about the technical aspects of like the guy sitting in the back seat of the car trying to get the double, like
Yeah.
way back in the. So like when you talk about this film, I can picture you like huddled up in a corner, like
Yeah.
this is working, it's working. um
Yeah,
and
that was a
it's
lot of
kind
it.
of yeah, and it's kind of like what you said about being able to, when you're so focused on one idea, you don't see the other paths. When you have all these, like if you're working with a zoom lens and this shot isn't quite working, you might just zoom out or zoom in, and it forces your brain to shut off the solution finding. And so much of filmmaking is solution finding. So
Exactly.
I was hoping that your answer would be like, yeah, it was super freeing to do, because I think that is awesome, and I think
Yeah.
more people need to hear that. Like, if all you have is an iPhone, you can make a movie because Noam Kroll went out and made a movie with a or a last generation camera and a vintage lens. Like,
Yeah. That's the thing, is like we can all do it. Like I don't feel like I did anything that anyone else can't do. And like I said, like many other people have done it and like had success. And like I've had Pete O's on my podcast recently who made a feature for $10,000 in very much the same vein of what I did. And his film went to South by Southwest and is a great film, got a theatrical release. It's written up in all the trades, and like, that's possible if you do it, I think, the right way, and you kind of lean into those, limitations, and you make it just a unique thing. So yeah, I hope that more people will follow this model, because I really do think like, you don't have to be that technically skilled to do it either. You're not shooting on an Alexa, you can't really if you're shooting it this way, unless you're shooting the whole thing in one room and like, you can't have a full sound mixing board no matter what. So like you have to, the gear you have to use is so simple anyway that yeah, you could shoot it on a phone or you could shoot it in any way. And there's always a way to do it, but I would definitely do it again. Like most other films I've done, and I'm like, I'm glad I did it, but I wouldn't do it exactly that way again. This one, I would, I hope to also make many other films that have bigger budgets and are done on different levels, but this is 100% a model that I'm going to come back to because yeah, it was just super rewarding. It was more fun. And I feel like to me, the finished product is, I never think anything I did is perfect or without its flaw. Every piece of art is. But to me, I'm most happy with this particular film by far. And I feel like that came as a result of kind of doing things in this more organic way and not trying to force it to be something that it's not.
Did you feel like you had more mental bandwidth to manage all those hats, knowing that you had technical limitations?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I didn't answer that second part of your question before. Like, what was my favorite hat to wear? I mean, the favorite hat was like the one hat that I had, which was just the jack of all trades. And I think that like I've leaned into that recently where like people used to tell me early in my career, like, don't be a jack of all trades. You have to specialize. Nobody hires you and blah, blah, blah. And I went down like, I really studied color and I learned a lot about motion design and VFX and cinematography. And if I really wanted to, I could have specialized. But for my personality, I really enjoy doing a lot of things at once. So I think that being a jack of all trades, being able to wear that hat and do all the things that I love and hold the camera and listen to the sound and talk to the actors and figure out the story with them, like that was a hat that I've never really worn before in that way. I've done all those things independently, but to do them all together without another crew member actually becomes its own role that's totally different. And I like that. Now I forgot your actual question though, because I went back to the last one.
Do you think that you had more mental
Oh,
bandwidth
more
to be
mental
able
bed.
to yeah, just to focus on the project as
Yes.
a whole?
Yes. So the main thing that helped with the mental bandwidth was the amount of days off in between shooting days, which was from the beginning. I knew I had to do this because my first feature I actually released was called Shadows on the Road. And I shot that it like not back to back days, but mostly we had like 1 or 2 days off, I think, over the course of like, a couple of weeks. And it was just super stressful because there were some days where I would come home and we'd been shooting all day and I'd come home and I was like exhausted and I'd have to make the call sheets for the next day, or I wouldn't even know where we were going to be filming because it was all guerrilla and like crazy. And it just, I realized like even having a small crew on that film, it just wasn't big enough to do in that way and make it feel kind of smooth and efficient and sustainable. So on this one, I went into it saying like, look, it's going to take a year to make this movie no matter what. Like either I shoot everything in like 2 weeks back to back and then I just edit for the next 8 months or 9 months, or I kind of do it all in tandem and I just do a shoot day and I take time off and do another shoot day, I take time off. So in some cases there was 2 months in between shoot dates or more even, I think. And I might be, I might take 3 weeks without looking at the footage or even really thinking about the film other than kind of having it in the back of my mind. And that was very much intentional. So, that way if I have to go to run to the prop store to rent something or I have to make my own props and get a cork board and design things on Photoshop to print off and stick on there and Photoshop face replacements and all the things I had to do that were like the non-exciting things for production design or for like VFX and all of that sound design. Like I did every single sound effect myself. Like none of that was necessarily fun to do, but it was way more manageable because I could plan for it and because I had so much downtime in between. But at the same time, like over the course of a year, it sounds slower. But if you've made a feature before, no matter how you slice it, like it's going to take you at least a year unless you're doing something crazy experimental and you're like, Hong Sang-soo, who I've talked about recently, who shoots a feature in a day and cuts it in a weekend. But unless it's something like extreme, it's going to take a while. So like there's a lot of ways to sort of divvy up that time. And yeah, on this one, I found that made it like personally a lot more manageable to kind of do all these things. And even just like when you're paying for things, like you're not paying for your whole shoot at once, which is nice for people who are self-financing their movies.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. But you mentioned the tandem piece. So did you already have a script going into production, or did you adjust on the fly? Like, if you shot a scene, would you go back and maybe loop something else in, or did you just have your production and you were ready to go?
Yeah, so we had I wrote a treatment basically first and then got that over to the lead actor, Josh, and his girlfriend who came on, Gabriella. They're both amazing actors and they live together and they have chemistry. So it was like a no brainer to have them kind of as the two leads. And then, so they kind of looked at it and gave me some ideas and I just workshopped the treatment for a while. And then I wrote just the first act, which was like, 20 pages or whatever it was. And then my plan was like, I'll write it act by act. And I was only going to do 4 shooting blocks initially. So I was going to do like act 1, 2A, 2B, and 3, and then have a couple months in between or a few weeks depending. But it didn't quite end up working like that. So I ended up writing like the first act. We shot like one day that was like 6 hours just to get a few opening like moments. Then we shot like 2 more days, and then I took like a month off, and or more maybe. And anyway, in that time, yeah, I was looking at it. I didn't edit the film like nearly as much as I thought I would. I thought I was like gonna totally have the film edited by the time it was shot, and it just didn't work out that way because I was busy with other things, and I needed space too just to like write the script, and that came first, obviously, but yeah, it very much was like an evolution. And then by the end, I was in such a rhythm that we shot our last like 5 days, almost back to back, like within a week or week and a half period, because we were in such a good rhythm and we knew exactly what we were doing. But yeah, that, it changed and ebbed and flowed, over the months for sure.
Which you have that freedom to do when you're wearing what I guess we can call the gnome hat at this point, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I wonder because I'm in the middle of shooting my first feature. I'm 45
Nice.
minutes or so,
It's
and I'm
amazing.
doing it. Thank you, and I'm doing it the same way that you did. One camera, one lens, but a very cheap older camera with a very cheap vintage lens, and it's just me, like no actors, right? No set. It's me in my house playing with the theme, exploring the story, and I find it by far out of all the shorts and microfilms that I've ever shot, this is the funnest one I've ever done.
Yeah, I bet. That sounds amazing too. And like look at what was Skinamarink, right? I haven't seen it yet, but like these movies are like becoming very innovative and in some cases mainstream.
Yeah, we're getting art back in film, which is fun. And like I think a lot of people see like the Marvel movie and go, I'm never going to shoot my movie unless I have, $10 million. And then, we have these other people shooting Skinamarink or movies, even anything like that. I mean, we're living in the year where A24 swept the Oscars.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
we're here, make your film.
Yeah. And these micro budget films are thematically and stylistically far more aligned with the A24 movies of the world than they are with the Marvel movies, which is to me what's exciting too. It's like the audiences are there. Like some of our films don't have enough stars to get that much attention in the current distribution landscape, but like when people find the movies and when they see them, they tend to respond and a lot of them are influencing these bigger films and paving the way for filmmakers to make these bigger films. So like it's a pretty awesome time. And I don't know about you, but like I've never looked at the Marvel movies and said that's what I want to make. It's nothing against them. I've seen a few that I really liked. I've seen some that I didn't like as much, and I'm sure, some people love that thing and that's their thing. Some people hate it. Like everyone's going to feel different, but like it's just because that's the popular thing today doesn't mean that's what you have to chase if that's not the style that you're into. Like I get some people just love comic books and that is genuinely what they want to direct. But for most people who are chasing that just because that's the thing right now, at some point it'll be something else, just like it was westerns for decades, or just like it was any other genre. And there was new Hollywood, and you go through the eras of decades of time, and this is no different. So, like, you can't always just chase what's popular unless that's actually aligned with, what you love as a filmmaker. And for me, and I'm guessing probably someone like yourself, like if it's more about like the artistic expression, like most of my favorite films were made for under $1 million or $3 million, or these aren't like high budget films, and that doesn't have to be the goal, just to have the most amount of money on your budget. And a lot of times when that is the goal, I think it's coming from a pure like place of ego, where it's I need to know that my worth as a filmmaker is as valuable as someone else's, and therefore if my film has a certain amount of budget, that gives me a certain validation. But I don't know that that ever actually satisfies anybody, and I think the only validation you really get is by creating work that you actually love and are enjoying the process of making.
One of my favorite quotes ever that has guided me through filmmaking is, "Done is better than perfect because perfect never gets done."
Yeah. I've never
Like
heard the end of that. I know I've said the beginning of it, but I've actually never heard the second half. I like that.
that would be it. Yeah. It, Money solves problems in filmmaking, and that's all that it does. But so does creativity. And there's other ways to do that. I've been on a micro budget film kick lately, and I could shout out at least 5 movies right now that have been incredible. And to watch the creativity, especially through things like COVID, these COVID films are just like high art at this point. And I just want to touch on something that you had said earlier and kind of bring it to here. When you make a film, you might have 10 shoot days, which is fast, but it's going to take you a year to edit that thing and get it to where you want it. And by the time you catch up to the thing that you're trying to chase for popularity purposes, we live in the world of TikTok. You're not catching up to it. You're not getting that thing out in time to ride that wave.
Yeah.
And I think there's a word of caution in there. Like, make the thing you want to make, not the thing that you think is going to do well, because
Exactly.
that's chasing lottery tickets.
Yeah, and you're also chasing like decisions that were made by studios 5 or 10 years ago, because a lot of these movies have been in the works, pretty much all of them, for multiple years, in some cases decades, and they are now making decisions that actually don't always reflect the movies that are coming out. So you're always riding their coattails, and you're chasing someone's decision that is probably not going to necessarily be as relevant 2 3 years down the road, because they're already in the background making changes that the general public is not aware of. They're pivoting, and they're closing off franchises, and they're opening new ones, and they're testing different distribution models. So like, it's just a silly game to try to chase that.
100%, 100%. Which is why I'm glad, you agree, like producing your own thing and just making your thing is the way to go. You've seemed to find a way that worked. You actually mentioned that you really preferred this way of filming, and you do have another film either in the works. Is it in post yet?
No, it's in the works. So I wrote it.
Okay.
It's we're gonna shoot it in August, as long as there's no SAG strike that interferes with it. We're planning to
Yep.
shoot this August.
Now, so the question would be, and I don't know if you're ready to answer yet, do you feel that you'll shoot it in a similar way?
Sort of. So it's going to need a little bit more of a crew, because it's being shot. We have the locations for more of a limited time frame, and we have some really amazing locations, and just the way it's being done, we do need to do some things a little bit more traditionally. But what I'm trying to do is bring the exact same philosophy, like, very likely relying entirely on natural and available light. And if we use any lighting, like I will, for example, I'll likely have a DP on this. who I'm talking to now about coming on board. But we'll definitely talk about like how we can keep things very simple, use natural light, maybe have like one LED panel or softbox that we fly in if we need it quickly for a close up. But like maintaining that spirit of what I had done by myself, and then bringing it to this. And I think like, the other thing I've been thinking about a lot, and I've said this probably before, but I think it's an important point to underscore is like, just because you did something once well doesn't mean like that's the way you should do it again. Because yes, this last film worked out very well, in my opinion, for how I chose to do it. But the next film's a different movie and it needs different treatment in every way. And if I try to shoehorn it into something I did, even if it's something that was really positive, it's not going to be the right fit. So I just try to look at every movie as like, okay, how do I experiment not only with the storytelling, but also how the movie gets made, and take the best of what I learned, but then also try new ideas and try to infuse it in like different methods, and see what comes out of that. So on this one, there will be a small crew, but very, very minimal. And not because of necessity, because thankfully on this one, it's already distributed and there's an investor financing it and so forth. But it's just kind of how I like to work. And, even if someone cut me a check for $10 million, I would want to work with a smaller crew, not necessarily 3 people or 5 people, but, I don't think I would ever just think that I could solve issues purely with bandwidth and with crew size and with money, as you were sort of alluding to before. I want to find a way to maintain that creative synergy that I think loses its way once you get above, a certain threshold of scale.
Yeah, that the by default we're in a very collaborative art form. So I do find it extremely useful. Even like the thing that I'm making now, I'm constantly screening it, right? If I shoot 5 scenes and I change something dramatically that changes flow or pacing or whatever, I'm sharing it. I'm getting feedback. I'm trying to process that because, as you said earlier, it kind of, you don't want to stay in that box of like, this is how it has to get done.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful. Do you want to talk a little bit about the movie, the not Disappearing Boy, but this
Yeah.
next one?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about it. I think so we're shooting in August, like I said, that's the plan. And I think what's interesting is, like about this film in particular, is I wrote it very, very quickly, and I wrote it right after the last film. So maybe this is almost a point more in relation to the last movie and the process we've been talking about. But like, I feel like even in the sense of writing it, doing it in tandem, and maybe you're experiencing this too, but like writing, shooting, editing in tandem, I feel like it sharpened my skill as a writer so much more than just writing one more screenplay, because I actually saw the ramifications of everything almost in real time. Like if I didn't write the right dialogue line, I that was like that morning or the day before, and then we had to fix it on set, and then I see how that played into post and so on and so forth. So I think being able to very quickly kind of see that cycle of like idea to script to shooting to post, and then keep doing it over and over and over again, I felt that it really enhanced my ability to be more critical and understanding of what I should focus on when I'm writing something. So when I wrote this script, which is going to go through many more drafts, but I finished the first draft and it felt to me much stronger than most first drafts that I've ever written. And again, plenty of things that need to get fixed. Like it's not about like it being perfect, but I felt very differently about the result. And this is maybe like 2 or 3 drafts beyond where I normally would be at a first draft. So yes, it still needs work, but why is it feeling more cohesive? And I think a big part of that, came out of this experience. So I feel like, the point that I've been trying to underscore for filmmakers too, when I talk about making a movie this way, because I think a lot of people get turned off by like the idea of doing everything themselves or being this scrappy, and it's not what they want to do. And I get that, but I would say that like the benefits of doing it this way, even if you just do it once, on your own creativity, on your body of work, on your understanding of kind of the art form and the craft is is pretty tremendous, and that's sort of what I'm seeing now in this new film. And like I said, I can't, we haven't shot it yet, so there's not too much to kind of go into beyond that unless you have any questions. But yeah, really, so far I've very much been feeling the effects of sort of keeping the momentum for the last project, and using that as, wind in the sails of this one to, hopefully take it to and even make it an even bigger and better project.
That's actually really good feedback there, because like being able to see your results in real time and talking about honing your skills, those are two incredibly valuable things that anybody can do now. And we, it's not as sexy as like going out and buying the new camera, but those are real things that you can do now to see instant results and get better. I know I've been a lousy writer most of my filmmaking stint, and just kind of doing my own writing and doing my own acting and doing my own shooting, I'm in the same boat as you. It's like I'll write, act three, and I'm like, this is so much better than act one. And now I
Yeah.
have to go back, it's been great. But you talk about like riding momentum and those feel good moments and being intimate. I like to focus a lot on taking care of your mental bandwidth, taking care of your mental state, not putting yourself in situations where you can burn out or, cause yourself any sort of damage. So like in your experience, how does prioritizing mental health and your own well-being affect like the final outcome of the film? And do you have any like personal anecdotes that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's so important. And for me, it is one of the number one, if not the number one thing that I think about, because like anything in life, if you don't have your health, you have nothing. And mental bandwidth becomes physical bandwidth, becomes your overall health and well-being. And I have gone down the path of, my Shadows on the Road film that I've talked about this like a long time ago, or maybe more recently on another podcast too. But how, that project, I didn't schedule it in the right way. I didn't organize it in the right way. I got so stressed from it. It took such a physical toll on me, where for 6 months after making the film, I constantly felt sick, run down. I had to take time off of my commercial productions. Like, I didn't know what like was going on. It was like a very sort of, I overworked myself to such an extreme that I realized like, oh, if I do this every time, I'll just make two movies and then I'll never be able to make another one again. And that's not my goal. My goal is I want to be able to make, like, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So like, how do I find the bandwidth to do what I need to do, or set my films within such a scope that it's doable within my existing bandwidth, and then execute on that slow and steady every day, like write, just like writing a script. Like I used to think you had to stay up all night long writing a script and be in this crazy headspace and like do it and muscle through it. And now it's like, no, wake up, make like a cup of tea, and I sit here and like I'll type for 30 minutes, and sometimes if that's all I do, that's okay, but I'll write 2 pages. And even if I just do 30 minutes a day, which it's never just 30, it's always, then it turns into 4 hours, but even if it was just 30 minutes, like I'd have a screenplay done in 4 to 6 weeks, whereas before, like I would think about it for 4 to 6 weeks, then I would procrastinate more for another month, and then I would try to do it all in a week. And sometimes that works. Like it depends on you. And sometimes I've written things very quickly and it hasn't felt stressful. But just as an overall analogy, yeah, it goes into everything that I do. So when I'm thinking about ideas or thinking about processes behind ideas to make a film, a huge part of like why I'm choosing to do things the way I'm doing, whether it's keeping the days like, short, like 8 to 10 hours, usually, or keeping healthy food on set, like all those sort of things, I'm very, very conscious of, because, like I said, I want to do this for the rest of my career. So if I don't find a way to make it feel like a natural extension of my day-to-day life, then that's never going to be a long-term thing.
No, 100%. You talked about getting it out, needing
Yeah.
to fill that artistic hole. And
Yeah.
this is how you do it over the long term. It's not about sitting down and writing your script in 10 days. It's about writing your script, completing it, and feeling good,
Yeah.
you know? And
And
I
I
think
think,
that's so, so important to share.
yeah, and I sorry to jump in again, but I think like it really is like slow and steady wins the race because you can wait 10 years to try to raise money for a film, and you could be stressed that whole time. And then maybe if that film finally gets made, you're going into it with very little experience over the last decade of actually shooting anything potentially, and then very little experience of how to manage that mental bandwidth and that physical bandwidth. So I feel like one of the huge reasons, like I also preach doing these small projects, is like it not only sharpens your creative skills, but even your understanding of that and how to protect that part of your career. So as your projects grow, you can carry those lessons forward and you can say, like, okay, yeah, now I have some more money to work with. Now I'm doing things on a different level. But I still want to adhere to these core principles that I now understand are true because I've made film after film after film, and I know how I need to work to sustain this and to make this film successful, and also to make sure I'm making 10 more films after this one. So yeah, I think like the earlier you can practice, like it's easy to talk about this and think like, yeah, it doesn't really apply to me. But it will one day if you're, planning to make films. And the earlier that you can kind of sharpen that tool set, I think the better.
100% well said. Perfect coming from you. I really appreciate it. As we wind down here, is there anything that you want to leave folks with, talk about or that we may have missed, and then especially links and where to find you that I can add down in the description?
Yeah, I mean, I just say like whenever I listen to a podcast like this and someone's talking about their process or what they did, it's always like bittersweet because I feel like I learned something, but I feel like, oh, it's not exactly what I'm doing or what I planned. So I just hope everyone takes everything anyone, including myself, says with a grain of salt in that, I'm still learning. We're all still learning, and we always will for the rest of our career. So, like, you always have to find your own way and try the methods that are intuitive to you, and be okay with them not working because that's what's going to sort of take you to the right path. So, hopefully, some of this has been helpful. If people want to follow any of what I'm doing, they could go to my blog, noamkroll.com. NOAMKROLL.com. If you go to noamkroll.com/newsletter, you can sign up for my newsletter. I try to send tips and filmmaking advice every Sunday. And then, yeah, all
And
my
they're
other.
awesome. They're
Thank you. I
awesome. Go
appreciate
do it.
that. Yeah, so that's sort of like the core. Like also updates on films and things like that. And then, yeah, Instagram, Twitter. I have a podcast, Show Don't Tell, but it's all sort of you can find it all in the blog. So really appreciate you having me on. These were such great questions, and yeah, I just thank you for your time.